Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And it is Monday, February 8th, 2044. We are through the heavy lifting of our postseason. Made a couple of very significant trades in our last episode. So, probably going to be a relatively quiet episode as we head closer to the beginning of spring training and then the regular season. Still have a fair amount of money available, and we have increased our scouting and player development budgets a bit to $18 million on scouting, $36 million on player development. Would like them, especially player development, to potentially be a bit higher as we get to the regular season, but still want to maintain a little bit of payroll flexibility here. We had noted at the end of our last episode that we were thinking about possibly looking for a one-year deal for a shortstop. And there's a couple out there that interest me on the margins. One is Toby Golston, a player that we've looked at the trade deadline in the past. As Jackhammer Possessor noted, he's coming off a brutal year when he hit a .183, and he strikes out an insane amount of times. He's also fragile as far as his injury proneness and not the best influence in the clubhouse. That said, he is a good defensive shortstop who, with that combination of range and error rating, would be the best defensive shortstop on our team if we were to bring him on board for a short-term deal. And he does have some pop in his bat. Over the course of his career, he's hit 119 homers and a little over 2,600 at-bats, but he's also struck out over 1,000 times and has a career WRC plus of 91. So while I think we could definitely structure a contract with Golston that would be short enough to give us the kind of 2 years of coverage we need before we think that Fuchs, who we picked up in one of the big trades with the Yankees, will be ready to be our shortstop, I don't know that I really want to bring another negative-ish personality into our locker room. We've made a few concessions over the last few years as far as personalities, and I don't think our locker room is quite as strong as it has been in the past, and we'll touch on that in very shortly. The other guy that we're thinking about is Jaheim Lawal, also 29 years old, also a pretty solid defensive shortstop, has some speed. He's got better personality traits. He's normal as far as his injury proneness. Decent contact hitter and decent gap power, no home run power to speak of. My only real concern with Lawal, because as you can see here, he's looking for almost $4 million a year less than Golston, is that he's looking for an 8-year contract right now at a little over $7 million a year, taking him into his mid to late 30s. So that is not the type of commitment that I want to make to him. There's also some familiar names available. Tim Hull, who was our starting shortstop probably about a decade ago at this point. Then he was a utility infielder for us for several years before we finally let him move on. Another guy who's a respectable defensive player, decent in the clubhouse, not much of a bat at this point, and he's fragile physically, but certainly somebody that we could bring in if we needed to help bridge the gap to Mr. Fuchs becoming our starting shortstop. But I don't think it's a critical situation either. We knew when we traded away Andrus that we'd be a little bit weaker at shortstop, but we've got multiple guys who can play the position. I think right now it would most likely be Mike Whitehead, who offensively has had a similar career to Andrus. He's not quite as good defensively. His range is the same as Andrus, but his other ratings are generally a notch below where Andrus was. Danny Ferguson, our first-round draft pick from 2 years ago, could play shortstop. Certainly not a Gold Glove winner, but he can man the position. And same thing with Alejandro Contreras. Certainly not a Gold Glover, but I don't think he'll embarrass us at the position either. So given that we've got 3 guys who can play the position to some extent, and there are still options available on the free agent market, not really feeling too rushed to do anything right now. If the position becomes a bigger issue as the season goes by due to ineffectiveness offensively and or defensively and or injuries, should be an opportunity to add somebody in the trade market before we get to the trade deadline in July. I did mention that one of the things that I didn't love about Golston was some of the negative personality traits, including the poor leadership. And we did just make a trade to address some of those issues. We brought on Juan Castaneda, a reliever from Toronto. He's pretty much a generic right-handed arm. He's 32 years old. He does still have an option year left, which was part of the attraction for him. And he's also got some positive personality traits, notably high leadership and work ethic. He's been a pretty average pitcher over the three, or more accurately, parts of 3 seasons that he's pitched in the majors. But view him as a guy who, if he does end up on the major league roster, will be a somewhat better influence than the player that we traded away, and that was Pat Cheek. And Cheek is really kind of a mix of good and bad personality traits, but we had found ourselves in a position where we had as many people in the locker room with low leadership as had high leadership, which is a very rare position for one of my teams to be in, and just didn't want things to potentially spiral out of control. Cheek is making somewhat more money. He's an Iron Man. He's certainly a more talented pitcher. But in 3 seasons with us, he's put up a 3.13 ERA, 3.41 WHIP, 1.5 WAR over parts of 3 seasons with us. So he's been a fine major league pitcher, but we wanted to potentially get a better influence in the clubhouse. And as I said, it also opened up a little bit of money for us, which was helpful. We got a tiny bit of cash back from them. We also had to include a center fielder, Jesus Vega, who had been in the minors for us for a few years. Not a big loss there. But I think that balances our clubhouse out a little better than it was. As I mentioned, I've gotten a little more lenient in recent years trying to add talent to the team as far as players with potentially problematic personalities. You can see the addition of Castaneda gives us 4 potential leaders in the clubhouse now, plus captain Deshaun Seifu. We still have a few outspoken players, some of whom are not great leaders. Luis Comaduran is one of them, but we just signed him to an extension because in 3.5 years in Buffalo, he's put up a 130 WRC plus, willing to have him be outspoken and not the best leader when he's performing like that. Similarly, Josh Porter, another outfielder, has similar traits. He has not been as productive as Comaduran, but has still put up a 118 WRC plus over the course of his career in Buffalo, not Boston. And Porter likely headed for free agency at the end of this year, so we'll probably be moving on from him with the talent we've added at outfielder in the minors and the majors this offseason. But looking at those 2 players, and the other player with low leadership was our closer, Joe Scott, who we just re-signed. Pat Cheek seemed the most expendable to me as a good but still relatively generic right-handed relief pitcher that maybe getting him out of the clubhouse will prevent any issues from festering and becoming more serious by getting rid of one of the guys who was not necessarily the best leader in the world. And the last thing I'll mention before we start zipping through the weeks towards spring training, since we're going to wait on Golston and Lawal and Hull if one of them ends up dirt cheap or even willing to sign a minor league contract. Certainly wouldn't mind having them in AAA and in our organization, but don't feel like really making a major long-term commitment or even a medium-term commitment to any of them right now. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned Alejandro Ayala and you're looking at that really good defensive rating that he has there, the reason is it's his defensive rating as a center fielder, and he's pretty useless as an infielder. Similarly, Juan Aguilar is a guy who's solid defensively, would prefer at least 65 range for a shortstop myself, but he could play the position. But being fragile and with that bat, I really don't see him being an upgrade to the likes of Whitehead, Contreras, and Ferguson. So we are going to be patient, and that should allow us to perhaps get somebody at a better bargain, or maybe also save up some money for the trade deadline and maybe top off our scouting and player development budgets. We've made a number of minor league contract offers just trying to fill out our minor league teams. We've also, with the last $600,000 that we had left, made offers to 3 more international free agents, Rivera, Navas, and Giannini, none of whom look like big-time prospects, really just lottery tickets. And we've also made an offer to Danny Ferguson, the rookie who came up at the end of last year, to buy out not only his arbitration years, but a couple of free agent years, but also give him a little bit more these next couple years when he would have been making the major league minimum. So it's $38 million over 6 years that, or $36 million over 8 years that we've offered to him. The 8th year is a team option at the highest money in the contract. It's conceivable that Ferguson's our starting second baseman for the future. It's also conceivable that he moves into more of a utility role going forward. But if we can lock him up at that kind of money, I don't think it's a large enough or significant enough contract that it's going to cause us any consternation, even if he doesn't perform quite as expected. And we have signed a couple of those international amateur free agents. As I said, they're not really big-time prospects. Gilberto Rivera looks like he maybe is usable as a left-handed reliever if he develops perhaps a little better than we think his ceiling is. And we also brought on the catcher, Fidel Navas, who's really just a good personality to have in our DSL team for a few years, but don't really see him being a significant prospect at all. And some good news and some bad news today. We did get Danny Ferguson inked to that deal, so he'll be in the organization for the foreseeable future. And Juan Romero, who's led the Wings in runs batted in for 5 straight years, is officially gone. He's one of the players who had really good personality traits, was one of our 2 captain personalities. Now we're just down to Seifu. Looks like he didn't make a crazy amount of money, $10.7 million a year for 3 years, so not an unreasonable contract for a player of his ilk, with the additions of Boston this offseason in trade, re-signing Coma Duran, and then also the big trade that we spent a lot of time in the last episode talking about, bringing on one of the top young outfield prospects in all of baseball. Didn't see Romero being a big part of our future, so definitely a loss to have Romero gone. You can see fan interest has taken a little bit of a dip with him moving on, but didn't think spending more dollars on kind of first baseman / outfielders made a lot of sense for us at this point. And we've made it to the start of spring training. Probably have a couple roster decisions at the back end of our bullpen, with the fact that we've traded away Cheek and Rivera, who were both going to be righties out of the bullpen over the last couple of months. Probably have a couple battles at the back end of our 12 or 13 man pitching staff, which should be interesting and a bit of a unique position for us. As far as the everyday players, don't think there's a lot of tough decisions. If a Josh Fuchs, who we have talked about, our shortstop of the future that we just picked up, or if a Jim Reichert, our right fielder of the future, who we just picked up, happened to have a monster spring, that could make the decision making for us as far as the 26-man roster a little more interesting, but probably going to have both of those players in the minors to begin the season. So it'll ultimately be a matter of cutting 50 down to 26, but we've got about a month to figure out what the math behind that will be. And we made it through the first couple weeks of camp. No major injuries so far. Golston ended up signing, I believe, with the Yankees right before spring training. I know I haven't mentioned that yet. Ended up getting decent money from them, $9.5 million for each of the next 2 years. As I said, I don't hate him, but thanks in part to the advice of viewers, including Jackhammer Possessor, just kind of thought that might not be the perfect fit for us with the bat that's been as bad as it's ever been this past year. The fact that he's closing in on 30 years old, fragile physically, not the best in the clubhouse, and of course the insane number of strikeouts. So moved on from Golston, but Jaheim Lawal is still around, and he is intriguing to me. That 70 infield range is certainly attractive for a shortstop. He hasn't been a big-time offensive player over the course of his career. In fact, you can see over these past 4 years with the Dodgers, with 63, 54, 90, and 60 WRC pluses, he's been a pretty troubled offensive player after being a bit more effective the first 3 years of his career. He's only looking for a 1-year deal now, so that's certainly a stark contrast from the 8 years that he had previously been looking for as a free agent. Don't feel like it's necessary for us to go after him quite yet. I'd honestly rather have him on a minor league deal and stash him in AAA, which he conceivably might be willing to agree to in a couple of weeks. Right now, at this point, kind of content to go with Whitehead as our shortstop to start the season. And if we have to make some changes going forward, we've got money in the budget to do it. So it's nice that Lawal is still out there. Looks like Tim Hull is actually gone at this point, so he's off the market. So that's one fewer option. But I don't feel like it's such a compelling thing that I have to do it, because although he is a little bit better defensively than Whitehead, he's worse offensively, and right now at least he's going to cost more money. And as you've seen, Bobby Bolig, our old friend, still out there, still looking for big money. It's hard for Bobby to kind of acknowledge what he is and how he's viewed today as compared to maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And we made it to the end of spring training. As we often do, we went with a 6-man rotation in the spring. Barajas, Lance, Barbarito, Lott, and Manelli were, in theory, kind of locked into the top 5 spots. We let Jim Coles, the 23-year-old youngster, be the 6th starter, and with a 2.19 ERA over 12 1/3 innings, he certainly held his own in the spring. Likely will be beginning the season in Albany, just to ensure that he can pitch every day, split last year between AA Utica and AAA Albany. But it's possible he could make the team coming out of spring training, especially with those spots in the back end of the bullpen that, as I had mentioned, are now going to be open. And we've made it to April Fool's Day and the end of spring training, and no real shocks as far as our 26-man roster. We already kind of touched upon the rotation. The big change we made is that Jim Lance, the 26-year-old, is going to be our opening day starter for the first time in his career. Alexis Barajas, I think he's been our opening day starter and our number 1 pitcher for the better part of a decade at this point. Exactly a decade since he came over. Well, not quite a decade since he came over in the middle of the 2034 season, but he has been the man for a long period of time. but he's going to be our number 2 starter going forward. Barajas had a captain personality a couple of years ago, so I have noticed in OOTP 24, it seems like players' personalities kind of evolving and changing, is a bit more dynamic than it had been in previous versions, given the issues we potentially have in the clubhouse. Would have certainly appreciated if Barajas still had that captain personality, but at the age of 35, he could be getting ready for his final go-round in Buffalo. Still a very effective pitcher last year, 13-8 with a 3.76 ERA. But he does have a player option for $20 million next year for the final year of his deal. So it'll be interesting to see what Barajas does with that. Talking about a contract extension, he's looking for $5 million and $27.6 million a year average. So presumably that means that Barajas will be opting out at the end of this year. Barbarito, Lott, and Manelli all round out the rotation. Joe Scott back as our closer, Floyd Auclair as our stopper, Chris Powers and Nate Ruckel in setup roles, Luis Palencia, Juan Castaneda, who we talked about the trade for earlier, in middle relief roles, and then Mike Roberts and Joe Warner, a lefty who we traded for this past offseason, going to be our long relievers. Roberts is the former 7th-round pick out of Coastal Carolina, now 26 years old. He's toiled in the upper reaches of our organization for several years now, gotten a couple small cups of coffee, and with the trades we made away to move on from a couple of the right-handed relievers in the back of the bullpen, Roberts, at the very least, hopefully will let us get a little younger in that spot. Moving on to the 13 position players we're going to take north, and I don't think there's any real shocks here either. Juan Ramirez is going to be the starting catcher. The newly acquired Chris Malone will be his backup. Daniel Rojas back as our first baseman. Deshaun Seifu and what could be his final go-round back as our DH. Alejandro Contreras, utility infielder. Danny Ferguson will play second. Ramiro Medina third, and Mike Whitehead short. The newly acquired Tim Boston will be playing left field against right-handed pitching. Ishmael Velasco will be our center fielder against right-handed pitching, and Luis Comaduran will be our right fielder against right-handed pitching. Canales will swap into right field against lefties, and Porter will swap in to the outfield against lefties as well. I guess Porter actually is going to go to right, and Canales is going to go to left against left-handed pitching. So we did end up making an offer to one shortstop. Pure minor league contract offer here. He's not even a natural shortstop, but John Allen Follett. You can see pretty solid defensive infielder, 60 rating overall at shortstop. Not really the greatest bat in the world, but he is a switch hitter, and he was up with the Yankees last year, willing to consider a minor league contract. So he gives us, if we are able to get him signed, a little bit of optionality at the shortstop position if we want it going forward. Bobby Bolig still looking for $8.5 million. Spencer Nivens, who's only I think 30 some odd hits away from 3,000. Yeah, 38 hits away from 3,000 at this point. The 42-year-old still out on the market, trying to get those last 38 hits from somebody. If any of those kind of bigger bats linger, we'd certainly consider bringing them into our minor league organization, but it's going to be interesting to see how this year goes. You can see we've got about $12 million available right now that will allow us to boost player development up a little bit. We'll pop that up to $39 million, given that we've got a lot of expensive, in terms of what we had to trade away for them, new prospects in our system this year. Going into a year, our fan interest at only 98 is not quite where we've typically been for most of the last decade. We've been running 100 plus, but it is what it is. Hopefully the fans will still want to come out and see a team that we're hoping is going to be competitive. We have a very long run at this point of playoff appearances every year since 2028. So that means that we're going to be trying for a 17th consecutive playoff appearance this year. And hopefully, if we're able to guide this team back into the playoffs, maybe we can win a fourth World Series title here in what may be Deshaun Seifu's final go-round with the Buffalo Wings. And with spring training complete and the 26-man roster settled, we're going to call it the end of an episode here. Next time around, we will take a look at what the predictions are for our Buffalo Wings here in the 2044 season. And we will also have the first pitch and play through our opening day game. Don't know why that was so confusing and difficult for me to get out there. I was trying to look to see who it's against, and unfortunately we're a little behind that, but we'll be on the road to begin the 2044 season on Monday at the Washington Nationals, and we'll be playing through that game and seeing if we can get the season off to a good start in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.